which is also recognized, but also strong firm-level capabilities and entrepreneurial management to drive those firms. Without that third component, in my view, the transition to a knowledge economy will be hard. So as you look ahead here in Saudi Arabia, as you get started with incubation, as you have more successes, and I would say also more failures, you must have failures in order to have successes. So as you move forward and have both more failures and more successes, then one must also focus on strong dynamic capabilities. So what do regional clusters look like? Regional clusters are geographic concentrations of interconnected companies. So the first thing that we have to recognize here, it's not just a matter of seeding more companies, it's also a matter of having those companies interconnected. And we saw an example of that where one has already been bought out here. And so there's certainly transactions at exit, but all the way through to exit, if there is an exit, one must be working on building alliances upstream, downstream, horizontally, vertically, etc. And inside those clusters, new firms are constantly being launched and rapidly maturing, while at the same time mature companies are reinventing. So we need all of these elements. We need the creation of new enterprises. We need those new enterprises to be constantly transforming and established firms to be transforming too. That's what a knowledge economy looks like. It's one where firms are periodically transforming, not all the time, but a good deal of the time, because in the world of the knowledge economy, change is a constant. Now, these are not new ideas, although deep understanding of them I think is fairly recent. The industrial heritage or the intellectual heritage of cluster analysis goes back to the English economist from Cambridge, Alfred Marshall, who remarked upon the concentration of specialized industries in particular locales. But it took a long time for scholars to start to come up with answers as to why that's true and what it means from a policy perspective. It turns out that in Marshall's analysis, the factors that he identified are actually still true today. So even though it was over 100 years ago, he identified the ready availability of skilled labor, the growth of supporting and ancillary trades, specialization, and knowledge spillovers. These are the reasons why regional areas, metropolitan areas, or districts really get moving. And we need to think from a policy point of view how to constantly amplify those factors. And I know a good deal of thought has been put into those issues here in Saudi Arabia. And it's good to remind ourselves of Marshall's famous statement, well over 100 years ago, that great are the advantages which people following the same skill or trade get from neighboring to one another. So as incubation gets started and gets momentum here in Saudi Arabia, one would hope that there would be some focus and some benefit from many firms interacting with each other and developing particular clusters of skills and product focus. There are many examples of clusters all around the world. The chemical cluster in Germany, the Silicon Glen in Scotland, Cambridge in the UK, of course, is known for healthcare and biosciences, the financial services clusters in London and New York, and an emerging super yacht cluster in New Zealand, and one already well established in Via Reggio in Italy. And of course, in the United States, Boston, Route 128, not just an electronics cluster today, but also a biotech cluster. But then, as some people say, the true, or the ultimate cluster that we have is Silicon Valley, which is responsible for an increasing percentage of the world's innovation. And today, it's not just electronics. Certainly it includes electronics, but there's also internet technologies and biotechnology. So a cluster is more robust if it's diversified. And today in California, we have somewhat more confidence in our future, not just because we have a vibrant innovation center or a vibrant innovation cluster in the broader Silicon Valley, but because it's diversified. It's anchored by not just semiconductors and computing, but also by the internet and by biotech. And it's only then, when you have a diversified base like that, that one can hope to move into the knowledge economy. That's not to say that's where you start, but that's where one should aim to go. So how do you get this process started? In fact, starting is the hardest part. And in Saudi Arabia, the fact that you've gotten started is good. The hardest part may be behind you. That's not to say there's not a lot of hard stuff ahead, but the hardest part is getting started. And clusters result from startups and the continued growth and metamorphosis of more mature businesses. So we should focus not just on the startup companies, but also spinning companies out of more mature companies. At least in California, that's how the economy has become vibrant. It's not just the startups, it's the people that leave the more established companies and sometimes with a licensing arrangement, sometimes without, and provide momentum to new enterprise development. So big companies are important to the ecosystem of innovation. So you're lucky that you've at least got a few here in Saudi Arabia, and those big companies must be worked in. You know, I'm thinking of, obviously Saudi Aramco is one, and there's others too, but these big companies need to be part of the innovation system, and they can be part of it and contribute usefully. Cities, of course, are core to clusters because we're learning that cities are easy places for people to learn, they're easy places for people to interact. And despite the internet and connections that it allows to remote places, the power of connectivity in the city is increasing, not decreasing. So the irony of Silicon Valley is, despite the fact that it's a birthplace of much information technology, it's also the place where you have to be to have FaceTime. And certainly this is not news in the culture of Saudi Arabia, but FaceTime is still absolutely critical to the innovation process. Once it gets started, then one can be remote, but in the early phases where you're getting things started, being together is absolutely critical. But behind it all, of course, it's not just a matter of good public policy. You need entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are a class of their own. They're not traders. They're not investors. They're people that make new things happen through combining related and unrelated things. So let's pause for a moment to think about entrepreneurs, because if we don't understand how they're different from managers, if we don't understand how they're different from investors, if we don't understand how they're different from traders, we won't necessarily get the right policies in place and the right educational system in place and the right values developed in order to drive towards the knowledge economy. Joseph Schumpeter, the famous Austrian economist who moved to the United States in the late 30s, early 40s, defined the entrepreneur as somebody that effectuates new combinations. And that's a good point to make, because it reminds us that frequently it's not just about creating things new out of the research lab, it's about combining things from different research labs. And the power of combination should not be underestimated. Scientists often forget this because they get much enamored with the sourcing of new ideas. But the combining of new ideas and old ideas, and sometimes just combining old ideas together and old concepts together and old technologies together, can create new products. Here's another definition from Professor Stevenson at the Harvard Business School. Entrepreneurs are those that pursue opportunities beyond the resources they control. So that's obviously pointing out the visionary nature of what entrepreneurs do and their ability to reach out beyond the boundaries of their enterprise or beyond the boundaries of themselves to combine things from the outside and bring them to the inside. And creating entrepreneurial cultures is important, and it doesn't follow just from the incentive to profit. Professor Baumol of Princeton and New York University has said this very clearly. He says a private enterprise economy has a bias first to profit, not to innovation. Entrepreneurship has a positive value to society when it's focused on innovation. So just any type of entrepreneurship isn't necessarily good. You need to have the rules of the game set so that when people accomplish things, they're not just trading on a government subsidy, they're not just arbitraging regulation, but they're creating true value from bringing new things together. And the job of government here is critical. To get the right type of entrepreneurs, you have to have the right rules. And that's what the last bullet point is all about. Getting the rules correct is important for entrepreneurship. And there's a role here for CAST in making sure that the rules are set right in Saudi Arabia for incubation to really meet its full glory. So if I can just briefly summarize, and I'm clearly going to run out of time here, the components of innovation system that power the new knowledge economy are entrepreneurs, they're established companies. Don't get focused in incubation on thinking that this is the only part of the innovation system. Established companies are critical as well. The universities are critical as well, as is the state of mind and the culture. And the culture of innovation is one that must recognize risk, it must accept risk-taking, and it must accept failure. Failure should not be stigmatized, and entrepreneurs should be lionized, not just when they succeed, but to some extent also when they fail, so long as they start again. So to summarize, in addition to entrepreneurs, you need venture capital, and I'm pleased to hear that that's now come into place or coming into place in Saudi Arabia. You need the service providers that are already well represented, but you need a particular kind of manager, an entrepreneurial manager, and I think that's going to be a challenge and something that needs continued attention, and it must be anchored by the right government policies. And to return to entrepreneurship, and this may be a hard lesson to drive in Saudi Arabia, as it is in many other countries. It's okay to fail. Not to fail anyway, but here's the right way to fail. Shoulder the blame. Don't blame the investor. Don't blame the government. Fail fast, adapt, and learn. So if if failure can be turned into learning, then it's a benefit. And that's, I think, as incubation rolls forward here in Saudi Arabia, it's going to be easy to talk about the successes, but one should also talk about the failures and figure out how to convert those failures into possible new successes. As is often said in Silicon Valley, when an entrepreneur is seeking venture money, the venture capitalist may often say, "Oh, I see you've failed twice before, but that's okay. I want to know if you've learned anything." And if the answer is that you have, you're still eligible for financing. But you have to fail the right way. And I look forward to seeing, as the incubation economy here in Saudi Arabia evolves, that you have good failures. You're certainly going to have failures, but there's a difference between bad failures and good failures actually help. And the university can be a pillar for all of this. Certainly in California, in my view, there wouldn't be a Silicon Valley if there wasn't Stanford University, the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of California in San Francisco, which is where the medical school is. The universities are important anchors. They're not necessarily how regional ecosystems get started or how new enterprises get started, but they contribute and are part of the infrastructure, and I know here in Saudi Arabia that is well recognized. In addition, you need workplaces that have high autonomy and high accountability, where you need typically flat organizational structures, the rapidity of decision making, the need to move quickly, the need to constantly change, the need to reassess. That is all critical to success in innovation. And so one of the things here I'm pointing to is the fact that understanding the right organizational structures and management structures is an important part of innovation. So let me just mention one further thing, that regional ecosystems and innovation more generally also requires a strong system of intellectual property and a good work environment. The quality of life matters. It's hard for me to imagine Silicon Valley being as successful as it is if it was somewhere other than in San Francisco Bay. So let me just end here because I'm out of time. I wanted to talk about Silicon Valley, but I can do that on a future occasion. But I said enough, I think, to drive home the importance of entrepreneurship, the importance